do these differences, and I use the word difference rather than problems, because what actually may look like a problem in some actually can end up being a virtue in others. Increased creativity can look like a certain amount of disorganization. Inattention can actually be somebody who's very good at physical things. I mean, there's flip sides to almost everything that we do. And I think it's whitewash it, but there is a way that I think seeing these things as differences has some real advantages. But those differences then start to interact with our sense of who we are, our sense of what's meaningful in our lives. Are we good? Are we bad? Do people love us? Do they not? Who's there for me? Who's not there for me? What's my future going to look like? And those are deeply psychological and ultimately social questions. So to only think we're going to solve it with the neurochemical side is just not true. It's never going to be the sole solution. I think there'll be aspects of it that will be helpful. But we'll have to pair it with thinking about these other issues. And this is where things get so interesting, for me, and particularly in a setting like this. These are not new questions, right? How do we surround ourselves by people who help us develop an image of ourselves that's balanced, right? We all have things we like about ourselves and things we like less about ourselves, that have close relationships with people that care about us, that we care about, and that ultimately, at the end of the day, we can say, this is a life worth living. And those questions can't be broken off. And I think to some extent, if you go back 200 years, I don't think anybody would have suggested that you could separate psychology and theology. I think it would have almost sounded stupid to imagine that you can ask questions around the way our minds work and not think about our connection to community, to higher power, to a life worth living. And I think in this regard, I think we did something not so clever, which is we divided them and said, okay, there's this science over here, that's the science of the brain and the mind, and then there's religion over here, right? And in fact, they're not separate things. Are there different methods? Sure. But the way they come together, I think, is probably one of the most interesting things about the field of mental health and psychiatry right now. So this was all preamble to answer Eva's great question, which is, what are we doing in New Canaan? And I really think, hopefully, it will seem almost obvious after some of the other things. We are trying to get the word out, and we're trying to make it so easy, that is to take down every obstacle possible for individuals or family members or anybody to come to a place that's private and with expertise to get an evaluation of what's going on. How do we come to that? We came to that because we had a series of discussions originally led by the New Canaan Community Fund and Lauren Patterson, which I think she was ahead of her time and inspired to do this, and brought a lot of us together right around, I guess it was 2018, 2019, to talk about it. And what did we hear over and over again? That even in a well-resourced town like New Canaan, even in well-resourced Fairfield County, there were obstacles. And they were obstacles that shouldn't be there. They were things like, well, there was a copay on my insurance, and yeah, I guess I could have afforded it, but I thought I'll wait a few more days. Or there was a deductible. Those are financial obstacles. But then there were all sorts of practical obstacles. Well, I called up the therapist or the psychiatrist that someone told me about, and they never called me back. Or they called me back and said, the wait list is 5 weeks. Well, 5 weeks came and the problem wasn't as acute anymore. We moved on to something else, right? And you hear those everywhere. And people say, are there not enough therapists? Are there not enough psychiatrists? And then you get these lists, you go to these websites, and you're like, wait, there's tons of therapists and psychiatrists in New Canaan and in Fairfield County. It doesn't make any sense. And the reason is because the system is so fractured, and because of a lot of financial reasons, it's so hard to get in that people get discouraged and they don't get the kinds of care. And then you add stigma into that, makes it even worse. So we said, well, listen, we can't wipe out stigma overnight, although we'll start on that project. But what we are going to do is we're going to take away every barrier we can. And so we said, and this is thanks to the funding of the town under ARPA, we're going to make it so that you don't pay a dime. You don't pay a copay, you don't pay a deductible. If you have insurance, we'll bill it later, but we're not going to wait. You're going to come in. And we're not going to make you wait. We're going to have enough openings that everybody can come within 48 hours. So you can call on a Monday, and by Wednesday, you've got an appointment. And then the last thing we said was, we are going to make sure that the people evaluating you are not new trainees. I love trainees. I was a trainee for a long time, but this is too important for that. We're gonna take our most senior individuals with our most experience, and we're gonna have them involved in long evaluations. These are not 15-minute phone calls. These are in-person, 2 to 3 hour evaluations with a well-trained psychiatrist and social worker. And I can tell you, I've done some of these myself. It's an honor to do them, and no two are alike. And it feels like a privilege to be able to say, I'm not going to ask you about money. We're just here to figure out what the next step is. Now, 2 to 3 hours, of course, doesn't solve the whole problem. But what it does is it gives us a chance now to do what we do really well. One of the things we do really well at Silver Hill, which is we know all the therapists and psychiatrists and treatment programs in the area, really in the whole metropolitan area. So we're not going to a list and saying, oh, why don't you call number 1 on the list, and if she's busy, go to number 2. We're calling somebody we know and saying, I've got a 13-year-old boy in front of me who's got such and such problems, and he needs to be seen in such and such a way at such and such times. I really need you to take and see him. And that's a totally different ballgame. When you're doing that kind of personal referral, and they say, well, tell me a little bit more about him, and what does he need this? And we do all that. And we spend the time, and then not only do we make sure that that person gets to that appointment, we call them up afterwards and say, hey, I know you saw that 13-year-old 2 days ago. How'd it go? Is it the right match? When are you going to see him again? And that kind of what we call warm handoff is I believe what good care looks like, and it's the kind of good care that has really gotten much less common these days. So to date, we have done about 85 evaluations. We started very slowly in July of 22. We've done about 85 evaluations. Oh, thank you, sir. And I will tell you that 100% of the time we offered an appointment within 48 hours of the phone call. And it's very interesting. We didn't know. People have said to us, how many are you going to get? Or what ages are you going to get? Or what kinds of problems are you going to see? And the answer was, we didn't know, but I will tell you a little bit about that now. Half of them are under 18. Okay? It shouldn't surprise you based on some of the other things I said. And then another quarter are under 25. So what we're seeing is, a lot of young people. And it makes sense. It makes sense given what's been going on in society, what's been going on with COVID. Now, the other way you could see this is maybe we have more work to do here, because maybe there's folks over 25 who for whatever reason aren't getting to us or aren't feeling that we have the kind of services that they need. And so we're working on this and looking into it. We're certainly not the only evaluation service in town or in Fairfield County, so I don't mean to say everybody has to come to us. But I would say that we're interested and open to doing more. So that's what we've seen. Who are our best referrers? This won't surprise you based on the age. The school system is number 1. The New Canaan school system we've developed a wonderful relationship with. And Brian Lutzy, the superintendent, Susan Bliss, who works in mental health, have just been tremendous allies. We're on the phone with Susan almost every day of the week, and she's been terrific. And obviously these are complicated situations, because you could ask, well, what if somebody comes in and doesn't want the school to know, or doesn't want the parents, and every situation is different, right? The vast majority of cases, people have been open and said, you can talk to the school, you can talk to my parents, because that is best for the treatment. But we also obviously respect people's privacy, and if they decide not to let us do that, we would of course respect them. So that's the number 1 referrer. Number 2 referrer, I love this, is the moms of New Canaan. And I don't know if you all know, from the laughs, I imagine you are members of this Facebook group, which of course I am not allowed to be on. But the Moms of New Canaan is a fantastic referral source for us as well. It's where you go to find out all good information. So I think we couldn't have asked for a better endorsement. And then there's a smattering of folks from all over. So that's where we are now. We're thinking a lot about the coming year. The town has been enormously thoughtful and generous about continuing funding for the next year, but I think entirely correctly said, we want to bring more people in. We don't want this to be all just on New Canaan. And so we've spoken to neighboring towns. To date, Weston has agreed to join. It's a smaller town, but one that has a lot of commitment to mental health, and they have agreed to join starting in July 23, so that they'll be joining very soon, and they're with a 2-year commitment. So I'm very pleased about that. We do have ongoing conversations with both Darien and Wilton. Darien, some of you may know, is just got a new director of mental health for their school system, and so we've been waiting for her to get started to really have a conversation. And obviously we want people to feel comfortable, and there's a lot of options out there. But I hope over time that both Darien and Wilton, maybe even Richfield, decide to join us as well. I believe this is a model for the country. I don't think we're the only town that should be doing this. The other day, some national news organization called one of our folks, by the way, Susanna Lewis directs this program for us, who's wonderful. I'm sure many of you know Susanna. So they called Susanna and said, we want to do a story on this. So I called Kevin, and Kevin said, we're not ready yet. Let's wait until we've got it all figured out, and he's right. So we waited, but we will hopefully be getting more out about this soon. But let me stop on one other note. I don't think this is just about Silver Hill experts, in a room, making it very easy and possible to come and get an evaluation. I think that's part of it, but I think it's the success of the program is about a community. I think it's about people having awareness and feeling supportive of this kind of work. And ultimately, even though it may not be as tangible, it's a little harder to get the statistics on this, I believe that there's something about the quality of the community here in New Canaan, and I see it when I come to rooms like this, and when I hear your questions and I hear people's reactions, that over the long haul, I believe will be as, if not more important than what we're actually doing in the room with the individuals, families, and patients. And I don't have a way to teach that to other communities or to suggest it. I don't even have a name for it, to be honest. But I put it out there because I imagine it's something you all think about. I assume it's why you're here in this room today. Because you know there's something valuable from the community of a faith community, the community at a school or at a library or at a club, whatever that is. And as I go around, and some of you I've gotten to see more than once even, I think to myself, these are incredibly talented people, could be doing anything with their time. Why are they here? And I believe it's because you recognize that community is not just good for you, but it's good for your family, and it's good for everybody. So I look forward to hearing more, getting your questions, and thank you for having me here today.
Wow.
It's a great question, and this has come up a few times now. So I'll give you my hope and then my worry, right? My hope is you're doing a great job with that. So Russ Barksdale, who runs Waveney Life Care, and I talk about this frequently. And I do think that Russ has had this on his mind for a long time. It didn't start a few years ago. And I think he does think quite a bit about this. And his involvement, I think the older communities maybe had some access to services that the rest didn't. That said, that's my hope. I do think that there have been generational changes that are positive in the sense of accessibility and willingness to engage treatment. And I think there are challenges in the older communities. Some of them around stigma, and some of them around accessibility. So I'll tell you that as I mentioned, we ask people to come in person because we believe that there's something about in-person contact that is just not the same as on Zoom or Teams or whatever. And we make that a hard and fast rule, with one exception in the elderly community. If somebody wants to be and have the evaluation, if they can't get to us, of course we'll do that. And I do worry about that. I worry that community isn't as seen. So I was actually at Lapham last week. And Russ and I continue to think about ways to make sure this is getting out there. But I'm open to suggestions if you have other ideas about how we can reach that community. Yeah.
So you're saying that these concepts are married, right? Maybe they didn't divorce inappropriately, but they're married. There's philosophy, faith, whatever, and then there's health.
Right.
And so, given the room, assume resources, assume stability socially. What are the 5 things that like parents need to do to keep their kids least likely to encounter this system?
Yeah. Great question. So I think probably number one is create a culture within one's family where it's okay to talk about these things, because as hard as we try, and a lot of people are trying very hard, right? The incidence of mental illness is high enough that there's no family that doesn't have some aspect of it. So number one, I would say, create the openness, because if you don't, then if it's there, you're driving it underground, things are going to get worse. So that would be my number one, would be create that. So number 2 would be think about what, as a family, one is doing to kind of support a set of good values and health within the family. And so that's stuff that comes along with good parenting, and it may be obvious, but spending time together, right? Obviously, it's harder when families are split apart, or people are at home. It's like family meals and all that stuff. Spend time together. Talk about things, values that are actually positive, because it's very easy, particularly in a hyper-competitive area like Fairfield County, and I don't mean to make this the boogeyman, because it's not the boogeyman, but it's very easy to focus on superficial stuff, on what college did you get into, and what car do you drive, and try to focus on the things that make life good, and what makes life good. So a sense of purpose, a sense of helping others, a sense of being part of a community. I don't have to teach you guys that, but so that would be my number 2. My number 3 would be think seriously about the role of some of the more problematic societal behaviors, and I would include in that substances, and I would include in that social media and electronics. You're not going to eliminate either one. Just I was at a party not maybe a year, 2 years ago with one of the for one of my kids, and this dad comes up to me and says, "Isn't it great that here in Fairfield County no kids use substances?" I'm like, "Oh, that's a problem." Right? I'm like, "Where is that?" Right? So we're not going to get rid of those things. We're going to get rid of all screens. That's not possible, at least at this stage. So figure out how to manage those, and it doesn't mean being totally permissive, obviously, or just throwing up one's hands, but it doesn't mean being so draconian that you say, never want you to talk about alcohol in your life, because realistically that you're going to drive it underground. So again, people far more sophisticated than I have written and thought about it, and there's no one right answer to it, but you can't ignore either one. They both have to get addressed. Number 4, I'd say, is if and when a problem develops, think carefully about how you're going to address it. Because I think one of the biggest challenges for parents, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen this, is that when a child is suffering, it splits the parents. And one parent goes one way, the other parent goes the other way. And inevitably, neither one's right, neither one's wrong. They both have a point. And there's kind of gender biases that the old story tended to be. The mom was more worried, and the dad was more, it's not such a big deal. And maybe the answer was, it's important, but maybe it's not, the level of worries and helping yourself. That's a gendered kind of, but I've seen it the other way just as frequently, right? I've seen dads get super worried and moms less worried. I've seen one parent get saddled with all the responsibility and the other one not. And that's an opportunity, and I'm just using a traditional couple model, but there's grandparents, there's aunts or uncles, or there's something else, is to have a thoughtful response to it that does involve some sort of expertise. And I do believe that a good evaluation is an important part, because it's tempting sometimes to kind of throw easy answers, and then you can start to throw one after the other, and they don't work, and then it gets very discouraging for everybody, including the person affected. So my solution is, okay, a couple quick things is fine, but pretty early on, if you feel like you're not going in the right direction, get a really competent evaluation. That's something we do, but there's other ways to do. And then based on that, either get the right kind of therapy or consider medication. I do not believe medication is the right answer to everything. I think that's unfortunately happens in some parts of my field, which are not parts I'm particularly proud of. And there's also financial pressures on that, right? From insurance company perspectives, sometimes it's easier to say, 15-minute med check and start a prescription, or go to your internist and get a prescription. And I'm not saying that never works, but it doesn't work enough. And frankly, therapy works very well too. In more moderate to severe cases, you need therapy and medication. They actually need to be balanced. So anyway, so this is the approach to treatment. So that was my number 4. And I saved myself one more without thinking what I was going to put into the final one. But I'll give you an aspirational one, which I don't expect that we're going to get there soon, but I'll say it. Talk to your community about it. I know that's complicated, right? Your kids may say to you, don't tell anybody, right? And I get it. And obviously, at the end of the day, if someone doesn't want you to, I'm not saying you should ever violate their. But if we could get to a stage where this is something that moms of New Canaan are talking about. Also, moms in Weston, by the way, talks about this. But and it becomes a thing you can go out to dinner and just chat about with your friends, with your family. I think it will bring down stigma. I've told this story, and I'm sure others of you may have a similar experience. As a father of 2 teenagers, one of my principal roles now is driving them places. And I'm not expected to talk or get out of the car. I'm just expected to. Oh, God, that would be like, that's it. So I try to take the only pleasure I get left because I get to listen to the conversations. so driving on a Sunday afternoon, I do hear them talking about mental illness and about treatment in ways that even my generation wasn't, and certainly my parents' generation wasn't, and that gives me hope. Because I think to the extent you're allowed to, I would say talk about it, and it's good for you because you get ideas, and you blow up some steam, you get but it also, I think, changes our culture that all families do that. So those were my 5 off the top of my head. Yes?
Do you do these assessments for different people who have disordered eating or body dysmorphia, so that you are showing some harming behaviors that that's happening?
Yeah. We do absolutely anyway, right? You can walk in the door and we'll go down. Our youngest has been 7 years old, our oldest has been 94. We certainly do plenty of eating disorders. There are a few. One of the interesting things about our field, and this sort of mimics a little bit the other fields of medicine, is there are some things we're all generally trained to be good at as psychiatrists. If you have good training, we're all very good at depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, personality disorders, psychosis we're all pretty good at. There are some disorders that we have identified as really requiring certain expertise, and eating disorders is one of those. So you mentioned 2. You mentioned general eating disorders, which we actually know quite a bit about, and it's not our specialty. So we would do the first evaluation, but almost certainly we would refer to an eating disorder center, of which there are some very good ones out there that we have close relationships with. But the other one you mentioned, and I don't know how much people know about this concept of body dysmorphia. It's really been understood much better in the last, say, 20 to 30 years. Body dysmorphic disorder. And what it means is, and you'll see the relationship to eating disorders, it means that a person could have very good thinking in many areas, but they have a fundamentally distorted view of their own body. And it's actually fascinating because it can border on what you might think of as psychosis. Meaning, you can say to them, they're incredibly skinny, for example, and they feel fat. And you could say, look in the mirror, show me where this fat is. And you're like, this is, and they'll point to something that is like a tiny piece of skin on a skeletal frame and say, that's fat. Say, but you just got a 98 on your math test, and you got an A+ in science, and how do you, what it tells you is to what extent the way we perceive things can have these psychological influences that we still don't understand. And I would argue that the world's expert on body dysmorphic disorder, a woman named Catherine Phillips, who used to be at Brown and is now at Presbyterian Hospital Cornell, I go to her when I see these, and we do see them now and then. She actually, we refer to each other a lot. So these are the kinds of things, right? If I had a kid with that, I would not want them going to a general psychiatrist who didn't have specific expertise in this area. I want them going to Catherine Phillips. So it's that kind of, those kinds of referrals that are very important. Yes, sir.
In the overall scheme of providing help across the spectrum, you haven't mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous as an organization that I see having influenced many people.
It's a tremendous organization, and it's such a fascinating example of something, right? So, I based on my training, it's based on who I am. I go to a kind of science-y, medical-ish model. That's kind of where I come from, right? And one of, I think, the biggest blind spots to people with my background is you can sometimes not give enough attention to organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous that have been around for a long time, were not originally based in the science model. In fact, they emerged almost as a quasi-faith community with the emphasis on that have been tremendously successful over the years. And it's the largest, essentially, community of individuals with alcoholism in the world.
When you say successful, it's not an organization that has financial success, organizational success. It just people out there doing things.
No, you're right. It sort of defies the conventional ideas of organization, right? That you look at their bottom line, or you look at. I mean, I suppose you could, if you define success by number of members. And I will say that there is a researcher at McLean at Harvard who did go back and collect data about it, because after all these years of people saying, well, there's no data, how do we know AA really works and so on, he went and collected an interesting guy named John Kelly, and the data does support it. So if you actually track a certain number of people who use AA, their likelihood of staying sober is higher. The challenge, so AA is great for many reasons. It's essentially free. You can get a meeting anywhere, anytime. Whether now you can do virtually, you can do them in person. We, by the way, at Silver Hill, will do meetings on campus. We will send people out to meetings. We do the virtual meetings. So we're very, very involved in the AA model. Only challenge, and every organization or every culture has this, is there have been moments when there's been dogmatism, and certainly true of my field as well, but I'll mention this. At certain stages, AA has been against all medication, and basically equating taking Prozac, for example, with drinking. And I think mostly that's left the organization now, but you do still see pockets of that now and then. I once heard that an AA, I was a little hurt by this, but at an AA meeting, Silver Hill was called Silver Pill, which I didn't love, because we do prescribe medicines for some patients, not for everybody. But anyway, I'll get over it. But so that was one, and then more recently, there has been a real debate over something called MAT. I don't know if anybody's heard of this debate, but MAT stands for medically assisted therapy. And there's 3 or 4 quite well-researched medications that are more specific for substance use disorders. Probably the one that you hear about the most these days are Suboxone, which, methadone kind of people, that feels a little old. Suboxone is kind of like the newer version. And there are pockets within AA that fundamentally don't believe in ever using things like Suboxone. And to me, that's a little too much dogma. But I say that only to say that, you just have to be aware of pockets within any organization. But I think it's been tremendously helpful. Yes, sir.
You earlier were wondering, okay, we've got the sophisticated treatment protocols, we have knowledge, but what is this missing link of community support, family support?
Right.
How do we nurture that? I just needed to comment, the answer to that, in part, is you. I mean, what you've done in New Canaan to create a culture of mental health treatment being cool and accepted is phenomenal. And we all ought to thank you, because it's remarkable.
Tell my children, someone called me cool. As far as they're concerned, that never has happened in the history of humanity. Yes, sir.
So, echoing his comment, thank you very much. Feeding into your aspirational goal, everybody in the room, my community. I'm one of the 85. The social worker got me quickly hooked up with a therapist and also a psychiatrist. And I'm working through it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and thank you for talking about it.
And I'm not a plumber.
Yes.
Quick question, do you have to live in New Canaan to take part, can a family member of ours take part, or is it just?
So the way we did it, and this for sort of financial value reasons, was we said that it's free for anybody who shows us their proof that they live in New Canaan. But you have to pay if you're from outside. I would love to expand it, but we're gonna have to figure out the funding. So we're actually in the process of working with the schools to see if they have students who aren't from New Canaan, whether they would sort of pay a little annually so that we could do that as well. I know we work with the town around town employees who don't live in New Canaan. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but at least at this point, we're sticking to residents. Maybe someday it'll be different. Yes?
You may have said this, but I was wondering, after you've done your assessment, how successful are you in getting people into treatment? That's one. And the second one is, what about treatment for children under the age of 13 in like day programs or?
Yeah, both great questions. So you know, on the first one, which is how successful we are, the attitude we have about this is, you know, we look for the next step therapist the way we would look for our keys, which is we don't stop until we find it. So there is no, we tried for 3 days or a week and couldn't find it. We find something for everybody. It is harder or less hard depending on the circumstances, and you know, not shockingly, a lot of it does come down to resources. For folks who can afford to pay, we've never had difficulty because we're lucky. We live in an area where there are a lot of great providers, and even if on their first call they say, I don't have room, you know, if you have the capacity to pay privately, we will always find you someone right away and have. For the folks who have to use insurance, particularly Medicaid, which is or Husky, which is the hardest one to place, that takes us a little longer. We've again, knocking on wood to date, never not gotten a referral for somebody, but it's those have taken us sometimes a little bit longer. But you know, in every case, we've had somebody and then follow up. We've had some cases where people decided not to pursue the treatment we found for them, and again, that's people's rights. But we always, you put your finger right away on one of the greatest needs in not just you know, in our local area, but really in the country as a whole, which is care for children under the age of 13. So we at the hospital, for example, we have a pretty broad continuum. If you're 13 or over, you know, and obviously, you know, we're very busy, so this is not a way to get into Silver Hill, but we always have that as a fallback. If you need services, we go 13 and up, but we don't do 13, we don't do 12 and below. And the two best treatment centers for that are near Presbyterian Hospital Westchester in White Plains, which has a very good child unit, and Four Winds over in Katona. But they're almost always full. They're almost always full. And I have called the medical directors of both of those hospitals at times begging, not from the assessment service, thank God we haven't had anybody yet who needed to go there, but we need to build more treatment facilities like that. Yale did just get a grant, I heard, to do something new up in New Haven. I don't know when that would be slated to open, but this is a known national need. If Silver Hill were ever able to have support for it, I'd love. I'm trained as a child psychiatrist, so I'm very passionate about this. It is true that the rates of illness in the under, you know, before puberty are lower, and that's really because of brain development. The way the brain develops, these at least the more lifelong problems do tend to develop later. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and when it happens, it's potentially devastating, not just for the individual, but for the whole family. So I think, you know, it's one of many areas we need to put more resources into. Yeah, Scott.
I'd say
Any other questions? I want to take one privilege here as pastor to ask. Thanks so much. You started off with this, that we've divided theology, psychology. In fact, in our lesson today, we discovered the care of souls is a word in the New Testament. It's psychos, which of course is where psychology, psychiatry comes from. And so we need to get back to the care for souls, the cure, as it were. And the church has been infamous in its destruction of souls for abuse, LGBT, exclusionary practices, etc. I suppose misogyny, patriarchal, etc. So when you talk about recovering the vision for healing presence in the community, what would be the first 5 things that come to your mind that for the church? I'm kidding, but or 3, yeah. What would be the things that we should be doing as a community in this town to be part of the healing process toward mental health for all people?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So listen, this is why you and I connect so well, because I think we see things very, very similarly. Of course, the church is not different than any other organization in this regard, right? Or organizations, whether it be organized psychiatry or organized, psychology or any other government institution, makes mistakes. And the question of, we live in a time where it is so tempting to paint these things in black and white pictures. And one of the other ways in which I see the approaches to be so compatible is how do we move away from that, right? I mean, it seems to me, and this is far out of my area of expertise, but that one of the teachings of the church is, even back to the original notion of forgiveness and sin, is around, you don't just write somebody off. You don't just say, well, you did this one thing, we're done, right? You're all bad, or you're all good, right? That people are more complicated than that. It's exactly what we think in mental health. So I think there's so much room for coming together, and is this the concept of grace? I mean, the idea of being willing to forgive one another for things, and say, hey, that's not where we need to spend our time. What we need to spend our time is what we're going to do next, and that's your question. So what do I think? I think we continue to come together. I mean, I think the notion of sort of interdisciplinary, interfaith community, and Cheryl Bundy is our chaplain at Silver Hill, and she, I know, participates with Scott and others in the town. I think there's more opportunities there. And my dream is that my children look and see these adults who seem to come from different worlds, right? That's interesting that you guys are all talking to each other, and you're not just hating on each other. You're actually disagreeing sometimes respectfully, but you're coming up with solutions for the future. So I think that kind of interdisciplinary. I mean, that's again why I'm so thrilled you invited me, because I think it's cool to be a psychiatrist coming and talking in the church, right? That's neat. We should do more of things like that, and we should have pastors talking at Silver Hill, and we do some, but we should do more of that. Scott and we were talking about when I had dinner with Miroslav. They're really, he's a Yale theologian ordained, talking about why aren't we doing more of his course? So they teach this extremely popular course called Life Worth Living. Why aren't we doing that at Silver Hill? Wouldn't everybody at Silver Hill benefit from that? Sure. So I thought, let's do something collaborative. Maybe the church and Silver Hill and Miroslav get together and do a New Canaan version of this course that we all go to together or something. I mean, I'm just messing around with ideas, but I think that interdisciplinary nature of things, is probably my number one. I think, and I'll do more than 5 because I don't think I can do 5. But I think my mind does go to the folks from areas that are less privileged, and I do think we're enormously lucky, right? We live in a town that has the ability to do it, and sort of implicit in what I said is I'm talking about inviting Darien and Wilton and Ridgefield. I didn't say we're going to invite Norwalk or Bridgeport, right? And there's a reason, because these are big cities that we don't have the resources. We opened the door for assessments in those 2 places. We'd be flooded in a day, right? And that's a tragedy, right, that we're not doing it. But then the question comes, isn't part of the good works, isn't part of what we do at Silver Hill. We're a nonprofit, by the way. We were founded under the principle of giving back to the community. Could we do something collaborative in one of those towns? And those towns certainly need it. I had the chance to visit something called the Bridgeport Rescue Mission about 6 months ago, which is a homeless shelter that was, I believe, linked to one of the faiths there. I can't remember now which one, but you know, nonprofit, all done by donation and maybe some funding from the city, but I don't think a ton. And I thought, what about doing more mental health treatment there? That's challenging. That's not easy. You may be aware that the Bridgeport mayoral election is coming up. And you know, there are candidates talking about these issues. I'm not getting into politics at all, but I will tell you that the issues around mental health are coming up in that election, and I think that's a good thing. So I don't know exactly what our appropriate role is there. I mean, this is something that Laura and Patterson and I are talking about for the community fund as well. But I'd like to think that all these smart people coming together, we can think of ways that the things we do could affect not just New Canaan, but Fairfield County. Because we're all neighbors, right? We're all in the language of the current corporations. We're all part of the same team, you know. Yeah. And what affects folks in our neighboring towns affects us. So that's, I guess, you know, the challenge I'll put out there and say that we struggle with it at Silver Hill, and I imagine you guys do too, and I'd love to have more conversations about it.
Let's say thanks to our we'll see you next week for Scottish Heritage Sunday. See Randy if you have any questions about that.
Talking about he's like from Silver Hill.
On the way home.
Silver Hill.
When we get home.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Anna.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Always can use good supervisors. So if you're interested, you're right here. Because we have insurance and fellows who are learning.
Sorry. My bad.
Granddaughter's at the football. I've only seen her social media. Nice to see her. She's even cuter in real life.
So That's just a prerequisite. Yeah. So what I like to do is just reach out to me, and I think I may have been but reach out to me. When I say we always start with that's and that starts you don't for the residential.
I know.